El ganadero le dio comida, sin saber que ella tenía hambre de otra cosa. The sun had just begun to rise over the small village, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange. The air was fresh and filled with the scent of earth and grass, a smell that spoke of morning spent outdoors. In the middle of this quiet village, there was a ranch, not very large but well kept, with cattle grazing calmly in the fields. The ranch belonged to a man known by everyone as the ganadero. He was a tall man with a gentle face, marked by years of hard work in the sun. Though his hands were rough and calloused, there was a kindness in his eyes that made people feel comfortable around him. Every day, the ganadero followed a routine that had become a part of his life. From dawn until dusk, he moved among his animals, feeding them, checking their health, and sometimes just sitting by the fence watching them. To him, his cattle were not just animals, they were companions, a responsibility, and a reflection of the care he had for life itself. The villagers often admired his dedication, seeing how much effort he put into even the smallest details. He would repair fences that were broken, make sure the water troughs were clean, and even talk to the animals as he worked. Sometimes he would whistle a tune while walking through the fields, and the cattle seemed to respond in their own way, moving closer or following him with curious eyes. Not far from the ranch, a young woman lived in a small, humble house. She was known in the village for her quiet demeanor and her hardworking nature. She spent most of her days tending to a tiny garden and helping her family with chores. Life had not been easy for her, and though she had enough to survive, she often felt a sense of emptiness she could not explain. People in the village saw her and thought she was content because she never complained, but those who looked closer could see the longing in her eyes. She had dreams and hopes, but there was a part of her life that remained unfulfilled, a need for someone to truly see her, to understand her, and to care beyond the surface. The ganadero first noticed her when he saw her walking by the fields early one morning. She carried a small basket, her steps careful and measured, as if she were used to walking long distances. He had seen many people in his life, but there was something different about her, a quiet strength, a gentleness that reminded him of his own sister who lived far away. Without much thought, he decided to leave some extra food at the edge of the field near her house, thinking it might make her day a little easier. Bread, some cheese, and fresh fruits were carefully placed in a basket under the shade of a tree. He hoped she would find it and take it without worrying about who had left it. It was a small gesture, but in his mind, it was enough to help someone in need. The young woman noticed the food the next day. She had been struggling to make her small meals last, and the sudden appearance of fresh food brought a mix of relief and curiosity. She looked around, wondering who had left it, and her eyes met the fence where the ganadero was standing at a distance, observing quietly. She smiled faintly, a small gesture of gratitude, though she did not fully understand why someone would care for her in this way. It was not just the food that touched her, it was the thought behind it, the act of kindness that made her feel noticed in a world where she often felt invisible. From that moment, a subtle connection began to form between them. The ganadero continued his routine, leaving small tokens of care, a bit of bread, some eggs, or occasionally a basket of vegetables. Each time, he did not expect anything in return, believing that giving food was a way to show kindness and support. Yet he remained unaware that while she appreciated the food, it did not reach the part of her that truly hungered for attention, understanding, and human connection. She had needs that went beyond the physical, needs that could not be satisfied with meals or gifts. But in the early days, neither of them understood this, and their relationship was built on small gestures that seemed meaningful but were incomplete. The village, quiet and peaceful, allowed their interactions to go unnoticed by most. Children played nearby, and neighbors went about their own lives, occasionally exchanging greetings with the young woman or the ganadero. He would wave as he passed her house, and she would nod politely in return. To an outsider, it might have seemed like a simple, everyday scene of rural life, neighborly acts of kindness in a small community. But beneath the surface, there was an unspoken story, a subtle tension between what was given and what was truly needed. The ganadero, in all his generosity, believed he was helping. The young woman, while grateful, carried an inner world that remained untouched by his offerings. Over the weeks, this routine continued. The ganadero grew more comfortable, thinking of her in the same way he thought of his animals, with care and a desire to provide. He did not know her favorite foods, her small dreams, or the fears she kept hidden from everyone. He simply offered what he could, trusting that his actions would be enough. And for the young woman, the food was a temporary relief, a small comfort in a life that often felt lonely. She began to notice his presence more, seeing him as someone kind, someone who cared, yet she could not bring herself to ask for what she truly desired, a genuine conversation, attention, and understanding. Evenings on the ranch were calm, with the sun setting behind distant hills. The ganadero would sit by the porch of his house, looking over the fields and thinking about the day. He felt satisfied when he thought of the food he had left for the young woman, believing he had done something good. But he never paused to consider the deeper needs she had, the hunger that could not be filled with bread or cheese. And so, life continued in its quiet rhythm, two people connected by gestures yet separated by unspoken needs. One afternoon, as he repaired a fence near the edge of the field, he noticed her walking slowly past, carrying a small bundle of firewood. She smiled politely but said nothing. He called out a greeting and she responded softly, her voice barely louder than a whisper. There was a warmth in that moment, a connection that neither fully understood, but it was fleeting, interrupted by the distance they maintained. The ganadero returned to his work, believing that this small interaction was enough to sustain a bond, while the young woman kept her thoughts to herself, unsure of how to express the deeper desires that food alone could not satisfy. The story of their daily encounters is one of quiet human kindness, of gestures that are well-intentioned but only partially understood. The ganadero continued to leave food, believing that this simple act made a difference, while the young woman silently longed for something more, a recognition of her feelings, a conversation, and someone to truly listen. And though neither of them knew it yet, this small beginning would become the foundation for a deeper story, one that would eventually teach lessons about empathy, attention, and the real meaning of care. The mornings and evenings continued in this gentle rhythm. The sun rose and set, the cattle grazed, and the village remained calm. Yet beneath the routine, subtle changes began to occur. The ganadero started noticing small things, the way she paused when she thought no one was watching, the softness in her smile, the shadows in her eyes. These observations were faint, almost imperceptible, but they hinted at a larger story that had yet to unfold. And the young woman, while still accepting his gifts, began to wonder if anyone would ever notice the emptiness she carried inside, the hunger for something beyond food. Thus, part 1 closes with the quiet tension of a budding connection, gestures of care meeting silent needs, and two lives brushing against each other without fully touching. The foundation of their story is set, promising a journey that will explore the meaning of true understanding, empathy, and human connection. Days turned into weeks, and the routine between the ganadero and the young woman became a quiet rhythm of the village. The ganadero continued his simple acts of kindness, leaving baskets of food near her small house, thinking that he was helping her, that these gestures were enough to ease her life. Each morning he walked the fields, checking on his cattle, and each evening he glanced toward her home, hoping she had found his offerings useful. He never expected a word of thanks or a smile in return, yet he felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing he was doing something good. The young woman, on her side, noticed his gestures, and while they brought her temporary relief, they did not reach the part of her heart that longed for connection. She appreciated the food, certainly, but what she craved was attention, understanding, and someone to notice her as a person, not just as a recipient of generosity. She began to feel a mixture of gratitude and a quiet frustration she could not easily explain. She would watch the ganadero from a distance, noticing his strong, steady hands, the way his eyes followed the movements of the cattle, and sometimes she wondered what he thought of her. Did he see more than just her presence? Did he understand the world she carried inside her? Despite the distance, a subtle communication had begun between them. She would leave a basket partially empty when she returned, a small sign that she had used his gifts. Sometimes she would place a fresh fruit or a small herb in return, not because she expected him to eat it, but because she wanted to acknowledge his effort, even in the smallest way. The ganadero, seeing these gestures, felt a warmth in his chest. He thought that perhaps she understood his intentions, that these small tokens were enough to form a bond. Yet, he still did not grasp that the bond she truly needed was one of words, conversations, and shared experiences, not just material gifts. One afternoon, the ganadero noticed her sitting under a tree near the edge of the field, quietly reading a small book she had borrowed from the village library. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting gentle patterns of light on her face. She seemed lost in the story, completely unaware of the world around her. The ganadero paused for a moment, observing her, feeling a sense of curiosity he could not explain. He wondered what it would be like to know her thoughts, to understand the world she carried inside her mind. But he only waved gently from a distance and returned to his work, leaving the silence between them intact. Over time, villagers began to notice their interactions. Some would whisper that the ganadero seemed unusually attentive to her, leaving extra food more often than before. Others remarked that she seemed quieter, almost withdrawn at times, despite receiving help. The young woman, however, never complained to anyone. She kept her feelings private, unsure of how to express the deeper hunger she felt, hunger not for food, but for understanding, friendship, and someone who could see her as more than a name or a presence in the village. The ganadero continued to act with the same quiet kindness. Each day he found new ways to provide for her, thinking of the meals, the fruits, and the small comforts he could offer. Sometimes he would leave freshly baked bread from the local bakery, other times a small basket of eggs or vegetables from his own garden. He believed that through these acts, he was making her life easier, giving her relief from the daily struggles that came with living in a small village with limited resources. And in his heart he felt a sense of pride in his actions, a satisfaction that he was doing the right thing. But as weeks passed, the young woman's inner thoughts remained unchanged. While the food helped her body, it did not feed her heart. She began to understand something important. She needed someone who would sit with her, listen to her stories, share in her thoughts, and notice the small details of her life. She needed someone who would see the sadness in her eyes when she thought no one was looking and respond not with gifts, but with care, attention, and understanding. Yet, the ganadero, despite his kindness, did not yet see these signs. He remained focused on his gifts, believing that material care equaled real help. One evening, as the sun began to dip behind the hills, painting the sky in gold and purple, she decided to speak to a close friend about her feelings. She confessed that while she appreciated the food, she often felt lonely and misunderstood. She wished for someone to truly listen, someone to care beyond the surface. Her friend listened quietly, nodding with understanding, and gently suggested that perhaps the ganadero, though kind, might not yet understand what she needed most. This conversation sparked a realization within her. Help was not always about what was given, but about the connection and attention behind it. Meanwhile, the ganadero remained unaware of this inner struggle. He continued his routine, walking the fields at dawn, tending to the cattle and leaving food baskets by her home. Occasionally, he would notice her looking at the basket, and he would feel a quiet joy, thinking she was happy with his efforts. He did not realize that while she smiled and accepted his gifts, her heart remained hungry in ways he had not yet recognized. The story of their lives continued in parallel, two people connected through gestures, yet separated by unspoken needs. The young woman started to observe him more closely. She noticed the gentle way he spoke to his animals, the care he put into each task, and the patience he had for the smallest details. She admired his dedication and thought about the qualities he embodied: strength, kindness, and a deep sense of responsibility. Yet she also realized that while these qualities were admirable, they did not automatically translate into understanding her. She needed someone who could recognize her emotions, her quiet moments of doubt, and her small joys and sorrows. The ganadero, for his part, began to notice subtle changes in her behavior. Sometimes she would pause in her work and look toward the fields, or she would linger a little longer by the tree where he had once seen her reading. These small signs puzzled him. He wondered if he had done something wrong or if she was perhaps thinking of something important. But he dismissed these thoughts, believing that his routine of leaving food and maintaining his distance was enough to show care. He had yet to learn that sometimes true help meant stepping beyond routine gestures and seeking genuine connection. Over the following weeks, the village continued its calm rhythm. Children played in the dusty streets, neighbors greeted each other warmly, and the sounds of cattle filled the air. The young woman maintained her work, tending to her garden and completing chores, all the while feeling the quiet ache of loneliness that no gift could satisfy. The ganadero carried on with his daily tasks, focused on his animals and the small acts of kindness he provided. Life moved steadily forward, seemingly ordinary, yet beneath the surface, both were slowly learning lessons about empathy, attention, and the hidden depths of human need. One morning, the young woman decided to watch him as he worked, curious about the man who had unknowingly become a part of her life. She saw him moving with purpose, checking the cattle, adjusting fences, and carrying heavy loads with ease. She realized that while he gave generously, he did so without truly knowing her. She felt a mix of admiration and longing, a hope that someday he might see her not just as someone who needed food, but as a person with thoughts, feelings, and dreams worth understanding. The ganadero, as always, continued his work with focus and care. Yet, he began to notice her glance more often, her small gestures, and the way she interacted with the world around her. These observations were subtle, but they hinted at a shift, a possibility that perhaps he could learn to look beyond his own perception of kindness and see the deeper needs of those around him. The seeds of understanding were planted, though neither fully realized the journey ahead. By the end of part 2, their lives remained intertwined yet separate, each living within their own understanding of connection and care. The ganadero's kindness continued to flow outward through his actions, while the young woman's longing for emotional connection remained quietly unmet. The story of their lives was no longer just about giving and receiving food. It was about the discovery of deeper human needs, the subtle lessons of empathy, and the slow awakening to the truth that real help is about more than material offerings. Days continued to flow in their quiet rhythm, and the small village seemed unchanged on the surface. The sun rose and set, the cattle grazed peacefully, and the villagers went about their daily lives, unaware of the subtle story unfolding between the ganadero and the young woman. Yet beneath this calm exterior, something significant was beginning to stir. The young woman, despite her polite acceptance of the ganadero's gifts, carried a growing awareness of her own emotions. She realized that while she had been grateful for the food, her heart longed for something deeper, someone who could truly understand her, someone who would listen without judgment, and someone who would see her as more than just a person to care for. She began to notice that the gestures the ganadero offered were kind but incomplete. The baskets of food, the fruits, and the fresh bread were all tangible signs of generosity, yet they did not reach the part of her that hungered for attention, conversation, and genuine companionship. She reflected on the quiet moments when she would eat the food alone, savoring it, but feeling a subtle emptiness afterward. She knew she needed more, someone to notice her thoughts, her dreams, and her quiet struggles. And in these reflections, she began to understand an important truth. Help is not always about what is given, but about being truly seen and understood. One afternoon, she confided in a close friend, someone she trusted completely. Sitting on a small bench under the shade of an old tree, she shared her feelings, explaining how she appreciated the ganadero's kindness, but still felt a deep loneliness that food alone could not fill. Her friend listened carefully, nodding with empathy, and suggested that perhaps the ganadero, though generous, had not yet realized the depth of her needs. She reminded the young woman that sometimes people give with the best intentions, but fail to recognize what is truly important to the other person. This conversation lingered in her mind, sparking both clarity and a quiet hope that the future could hold a deeper understanding between her and the ganadero. Meanwhile, the ganadero remained largely unaware of the young woman's internal world. He continued his routine with the same dedication, leaving baskets of food near her home and tending to his cattle with care. He occasionally glanced toward her house, hoping she had received his offerings, and felt a quiet satisfaction when he saw signs that the food had been taken. In his mind, these small acts of kindness were a bridge between them, a way of showing concern and care. Yet he had not realized that while he was feeding her body, her heart remained hungry for understanding and connection. One evening, as the sky turned shades of orange and purple, the young woman was walking through the field near her home. She noticed the ganadero at a distance, repairing a fence with steady, precise movements. She paused and watched him, reflecting on the nature of kindness and care. She thought about all the baskets of food he had left, all the quiet gestures he had made, and she realized that while he meant well, he had not yet truly seen her. The thought brought a mixture of warmth and sadness, warmth for the care he had shown, sadness for the part of her that remained unseen. Over the following days, subtle changes began to occur. The young woman started to observe small details about the ganadero, the way he spoke softly to the cattle, the patience he showed in his work, and the quiet determination in his movements. She began to understand that he was a man of deep kindness, someone who cared for the world around him in his own way. Yet, she also understood that kindness without understanding could feel incomplete. She longed for someone to notice her own quiet gestures, her small achievements, and her inner world. And in this longing, she began to recognize a deeper need for emotional connection, a need that could not be satisfied by food alone. One day, while gathering vegetables from her garden, she noticed the ganadero approaching from a distance. He carried a small basket of fruits and bread, as he often did, and waved politely. She smiled faintly but felt a pang of hesitation. She appreciated the gesture, of course, but she also realized that her gratitude did not fill the emptiness inside her. In that moment, she understood that what she needed most was not the food he brought, but the attention he could offer, conversations, shared moments, and genuine understanding. She wished for a chance to express her feelings, but she hesitated, unsure of how he would respond. The ganadero, on his part, had begun to notice changes in her behavior as well. He saw her pause and look toward the fields more often, her eyes filled with quiet contemplation. He noticed small gestures, a slight hesitation in her smile, a thoughtful look when she thought no one was watching. These signs puzzled him, and he began to wonder if he had done something wrong. Had he failed to help her in some way? Or perhaps she needed something he could not provide. These thoughts lingered in his mind, stirring a curiosity he had not felt before. In an effort to understand, the ganadero decided to take a small step. One afternoon, he approached her garden while she was working, carrying only a small basket and a friendly smile. He greeted her warmly and asked how she was doing, making an effort to engage beyond the routine of leaving food. The young woman looked at him, surprised by this small gesture. It was the first time he had tried to connect with her directly, without the barrier of material gifts. She felt a flicker of hope, realizing that perhaps he was beginning to notice her in a different way, not just as someone to feed, but as a person with thoughts, feelings, and a world of her own. Their conversation was brief at first. The ganadero asked simple questions about her day, the garden, and her family, while she responded politely but cautiously. Yet, in these small exchanges, a new layer of understanding began to form. He began to see that there was more to her than he had initially realized, that her happiness did not depend solely on his gestures of care, but also on recognition, attention, and empathy. The young woman, in turn, began to sense that he might be capable of understanding her deeper needs, though she remained unsure if he would ever fully grasp them. Over the next few weeks, their interaction slowly deepened. The ganadero started to ask more thoughtful questions, paying attention to the way she spoke and noticing subtle emotions in her expressions. He began to understand that true help was not just about giving, but about listening, observing, and being present. The young woman, seeing this effort, began to open up in small ways, sharing little stories from her day, her thoughts about the village, and moments of quiet reflection. Each exchange, though simple, strengthened a bridge that had begun with food but now moved toward understanding and connection. Despite this progress, there were still moments of uncertainty. The young woman occasionally felt hesitant, unsure if he truly understood her needs or if his gestures were still limited to what was convenient for him. She wondered if she should speak more openly about her feelings or continue to wait for him to notice. The ganadero, for his part, struggled with patience, sometimes wondering if his efforts were enough, sometimes wishing he could do more to understand her world. These moments of doubt added tension to their growing connection, highlighting the challenges of learning to see beyond surface gestures and into the deeper needs of another person. By the end of part 3, the story had reached a turning point. The young woman had begun to recognize the difference between being helped materially and being understood emotionally. The ganadero had started to notice her inner world and was making small but significant efforts to connect beyond his routine of giving food. The stage was set for a deeper revelation, a moment when both would confront the truths of their own intentions, emotions, and the ways they could truly support one another. Their story was no longer just about giving and receiving. It was about awareness, empathy, and the slow, careful process of understanding another human being. As the days passed, a quiet change settled over the small village. The sun rose and set as usual, painting the fields and hills in shades of gold and orange. But for the ganadero and the young woman, life was beginning to feel different. Their interactions, once defined solely by small acts of generosity, were slowly shifting toward a deeper connection. The ganadero, who had always believed that providing food and basic comfort was enough to show care, began to notice subtle signs in the young woman's behavior. He saw her hesitate at times, lost in thought, her eyes filled with emotions he had not yet learned to recognize. Something in him stirred, a desire to understand, to truly see her, beyond the surface gestures that had marked their earlier encounters. One morning, as he moved through the fields checking the cattle, he saw her sitting under a tree near her garden. She was writing in a small notebook, her head bent thoughtfully, her hands moving carefully over the pages. For a moment, he simply watched, feeling a strange mixture of curiosity and respect. He realized that her world was larger than he had imagined, filled with thoughts, reflections, and feelings that no gift could touch. And in that realization, a subtle sense of responsibility took root in his heart. He understood that if he wanted to truly help her, he would need to listen, to observe, and to step beyond the gestures he had relied on for so long. Determined to bridge the growing gap between them, the ganadero decided to change his approach. Instead of leaving baskets of food and quietly retreating, he began spending small moments with her each day. Sometimes he would ask about her day, inquire about the garden, or simply comment on the weather. These questions were simple, almost ordinary, but they were accompanied by a new awareness, a conscious effort to pay attention to her responses, to notice her expressions, and to sense the emotions behind her words. The young woman, initially cautious, began to respond more openly, realizing that he was attempting, in his own way, to understand her. One afternoon, she hesitated before inviting him to sit under the tree while she took a short break from her chores. He accepted the invitation quietly, settling beside her and observing the gentle sway of the leaves above. For a few moments, they simply sat in silence, letting the warmth of the sun and the calm of the surroundings create a space where words were not immediately necessary. Then slowly she began to speak, not about material needs, but about her thoughts, dreams, and quiet reflections. She told him about her hopes for the future, the little joys she found in her daily life, and the loneliness she often felt despite the beauty around her. The ganadero listened intently, realizing that this was the part of her world he had never truly seen. The baskets of food he had left were small gestures, but they had not reached the deeper hunger in her heart. He felt a mix of surprise and humility, understanding that true care required more than gestures. It required attention, empathy, and the willingness to connect on a human level. As she spoke, he noticed the way her eyes lit up with certain memories and dimmed with unspoken sadness. Every expression, every pause, told him something he had not noticed before. Over the following days, their conversations became more frequent. The ganadero asked thoughtful questions, not to satisfy curiosity, but to genuinely understand her perspective. He learned about her love for reading, her quiet enjoyment of tending to the garden, and her moments of reflection when she observed the village life around her. He began to realize that helping someone was not just about providing what they needed physically, but also about recognizing their inner world and supporting them emotionally. For the young woman, this shift was profound. She felt seen in a way she had never experienced before. His attention, patience, and willingness to listen began to fill the emptiness she had carried for so long. One evening, as the sky turned a soft pink and the fields glowed in the fading light, the ganadero and the young woman walked along a narrow path through the village. The conversation flowed naturally, covering simple topics about the animals, the garden, and the small joys of everyday life. Yet beneath the simplicity, a deeper understanding was growing. He began to notice the subtle cues of her emotions, the way she hesitated before answering, the soft smile that appeared when she recalled a pleasant memory, the slight tension when she spoke of her struggles. Each observation taught him that true care involved more than giving. It involved perceiving and responding to the unseen needs of another person. The young woman, in turn, began to feel a growing trust in him. She realized that he was not just kind in a superficial way, but that he was capable of seeing her as a person with emotions, dreams, and vulnerabilities. For the first time in a long while, she felt comfortable sharing her thoughts without fear of being misunderstood. She began to tell him small stories from her past, moments that had shaped her, and even minor frustrations that had once seemed too insignificant to mention. Each revelation was met with attentiveness and understanding, reinforcing the sense that he was learning to truly connect with her beyond material gestures. Despite the growing bond, there were still moments of hesitation and uncertainty. The ganadero sometimes worried that he might not fully understand her, that his efforts were inadequate or misplaced. The young woman, while grateful for his attention, occasionally wondered if he would remember the things she shared, or if he might revert to gestures alone as a sign of care. These small doubts, however, did not prevent the connection from deepening. They highlighted the delicate balance between intention, understanding, and communication that forms the foundation of genuine relationships. As the days passed, the ganadero began to reflect on the lessons he had learned. He realized that while his intentions had always been good, true care was not measured by the gifts one could provide, but by the ability to observe, listen, and respond with empathy. He understood that kindness without understanding, no matter how generous, could leave someone feeling unseen. And in this reflection, he found a renewed purpose, not just to continue providing for the young woman's physical needs, but to offer the presence, attention, and understanding that she had silently hungered for. The young woman noticed the change in him as well. She saw the effort he was making to engage beyond the routine, the care in his questions, and the patience in his responses. She felt a quiet sense of relief, realizing that she no longer had to hide her deeper needs. For the first time, she felt that her voice mattered, that her thoughts and feelings could be recognized and respected. The sense of emptiness that had lingered for so long began to ease, replaced by a growing hope and comfort in knowing that someone was willing to see her fully. In this process, both of them began to understand an important truth. True help and connection require more than action. They require attention, empathy, and the willingness to meet the other person where they are. The ganadero's baskets of food had been the beginning, but the real bond was formed through observation, understanding, and the patient effort to connect on an emotional level. For the young woman, this understanding brought a profound sense of relief and gratitude, showing her that being seen and understood was as nourishing as any meal. By the end of Part 4, the relationship between the ganadero and the young woman had transformed. No longer defined solely by gestures of generosity, it had grown into a connection built on empathy, attention, and genuine understanding. The young woman felt truly seen, her deeper needs recognized, and her trust in him steadily growing. The ganadero had learned to move beyond the surface of kindness, discovering the power of listening, observing, and responding to the subtle cues that reveal a person's inner world. Their story had reached a moment of profound awareness, a turning point where both realized that real care comes from presence, understanding, and the willingness to meet the needs that cannot be expressed through material offerings alone. The quiet village continued its rhythm, unaware of the emotional journey unfolding among its residents. The cattle grazed peacefully, the sun rose and set, and life appeared ordinary to everyone except the two who had begun to discover the depth of human connection. The ganadero and the young woman had learned that true bonds are built not on gifts alone, but on the patience, understanding, and empathy that allow people to feel truly seen and valued. And in that realization, they both found hope, comfort, and the beginnings of a relationship that promised to grow beyond anything either had imagined when their story had first begun with baskets of food. The days turned into weeks, and the quiet bond between the ganadero and the young woman continued to grow. What had started as simple acts of kindness, baskets of food and small gestures, had now evolved into something far deeper. The ganadero had learned to observe her quietly, to notice the smallest expressions of her emotions, and to listen with genuine care. The young woman, in turn, had begun to open her heart, sharing not only her thoughts and dreams, but also her fears and moments of quiet loneliness. Their relationship was no longer about giving and receiving. It was about understanding, connection, and presence. One bright morning, the young woman was tending to her small garden when she noticed the ganadero approaching. He carried nothing this time. No baskets, no food, no gifts, just himself, walking with a calm and steady pace. He greeted her warmly, and she smiled in return, a mixture of curiosity and anticipation on her face. She had begun to recognize the difference between someone who gives out of habit and someone who gives attention with intention. And today, she felt that he had come with a new understanding, one that was not tied to material offerings, but to the simple presence of someone willing to care deeply. They decided to walk along a small path through the fields, letting the morning sun warm their faces. As they walked, they talked about the small things in life, the weather, the animals, the rhythm of the village. But beneath these ordinary words, there was a quiet depth. The ganadero asked her how she felt about her dreams, her family, and the future she envisioned. He listened attentively, not interrupting, not assuming, simply allowing her words to flow and her emotions to be heard. The young woman felt a growing sense of trust and comfort. For the first time, she realized that someone could see her for who she truly was, not just as a person to provide for or care about superficially. As the morning passed, they reached a small clearing near a gentle stream. The sound of water flowing over smooth stones created a peaceful backdrop, and the sunlight danced across the surface in sparkling patterns. They stopped for a moment, taking in the beauty around them, and for the first time, the young woman spoke openly about the emptiness she had felt for so long. She shared her fears of being overlooked, her longing for connection, and the quiet moments when she had felt alone despite the kindness of others. The ganadero listened with patience and empathy, his heart moved by her honesty. He realized that while he had tried to help, the real help was not in the food he had offered, but in his willingness to truly understand her. In that moment, the ganadero felt a profound sense of clarity. He understood that kindness alone, without attention and understanding, could leave a person feeling incomplete. He promised himself that from now on, he would be present, not just in actions but in thought, listening, and emotional connection. He realized that he could no longer rely solely on gestures of generosity. The young woman needed something more profound, someone who could share her joys, her struggles, and her dreams. And he was ready to be that person, fully and sincerely. The young woman, feeling seen and understood, began to smile more freely. She felt a lightness she had not experienced in years, a sense of relief and comfort that came from being truly recognized for who she was. She shared stories from her past, dreams she had quietly held close to her heart, and even the small frustrations and disappointments that had weighed on her. Each story was met with attention, questions, and gentle encouragement from the ganadero. Through these exchanges, their connection deepened, becoming a bond built on mutual understanding, trust, and respect. Over the following days, they spent more time together, not out of obligation, but out of a growing desire to know one another. They worked in the garden side by side, tending to plants, sharing laughter, and discussing the progress of the small crops. The ganadero shared stories of his own past, the lessons he had learned from life, and the quiet joys he found in caring for his cattle and the land. The young woman listened with interest, finding comfort in his presence and admiration for his dedication. Their conversations were simple yet meaningful, filled with moments of silence that were just as powerful as words. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, they sat together on a small hill overlooking the village. The world seemed to pause for them, allowing a quiet intimacy to settle over the two of them. The ganadero spoke about the lessons he had learned from observing her, the importance of empathy, attention, and understanding in truly helping someone. The young woman shared her gratitude for his patience and willingness to listen, acknowledging that these moments of connection had filled a gap in her life that nothing else could. It was a moment of realization for both of them, a quiet acknowledgement that their bond had transformed into something meaningful and lasting. As the days continued, their relationship blossomed naturally. The ganadero learned to balance his acts of generosity with emotional support, recognizing that true care meant both providing and listening. He discovered that being present, asking thoughtful questions, and responding to subtle cues of emotion could be as nourishing as any meal. The young woman, in turn, discovered that it was possible to trust someone, to share her inner world without fear, and to feel valued for who she truly was. Their connection became a source of strength, comfort, and hope, not only for themselves, but also as a quiet example to the village of what true care and empathy could achieve. Through this journey, they both realized the most important lesson of all, that human connection is more than gestures or gifts. It is about understanding, attention, and being fully present. The ganadero had once believed that food and small gestures were enough to show care, but he now understood that listening, observing, and engaging with intention were what truly mattered. The young woman, once lonely and hesitant, had found a companion who could see her, understand her, and support her in ways that went beyond the material. Together, they had discovered the profound joy and fulfillment that comes from genuine human connection. By the end of this journey, the ganadero and the young woman had built a relationship that was strong, compassionate, and deeply meaningful. Their story, which had begun with baskets of food and small acts of kindness, had grown into a testament to the power of empathy, attention, and understanding. They had learned that real care requires more than generosity. It requires the willingness to see and understand the heart of another person. And in this understanding, they found not only connection but also hope, joy, and the promise of a future filled with shared moments and mutual support. The quiet village continued its rhythm of life, with the cattle grazing and the sun rising and setting. But for the ganadero and the young woman, the world felt richer, fuller, and more vibrant. Their journey had taught them that true care and connection are not measured by what is given, but by the attention, understanding, and presence shared between people. And as they walked through the fields, worked in the garden, and shared simple moments of conversation, they carried with them the knowledge that they had discovered something rare and beautiful, a bond built not on material offerings, but on empathy, trust, and the genuine willingness to see one another. In the quiet evenings, when the stars began to appear in the sky, they often sat together in comfortable silence, feeling the peace of companionship and the quiet strength of mutual understanding. The ganadero sometimes reflected on how far they had come, realizing that his initial gestures, though well-intentioned, had only been the beginning. The young woman, too, felt a sense of gratitude and relief, understanding that her heart had been nourished in ways she had never expected. And in these moments, both knew that their story had reached a meaningful place, a place where true human connection and empathy had triumphed over loneliness and misunderstanding. Thus, their story reached a satisfying conclusion, not with grand events or dramatic moments, but through quiet, consistent effort, attentive care, and the willingness to truly see and understand one another. What had started as a simple act of leaving food for someone in need had grown into a profound relationship built on trust, empathy, and shared humanity. And in the end, both the ganadero and the young woman had learned that the most meaningful gifts in life are not the ones that fill the stomach, but those that nourish the heart, mind, and soul.